Добрый день.
Good afternoon, dear colleagues and guests, dear friends. Let me declare open a session of the Dissertation Council for the Defense of Thesis by Muhetdinov Damir Vaisovich for the degree of Doctor of Theology, Specialty 260001 Theology, on the theme the Islamic renovationist movement from the end of the 20th to the start of the 21st century, ideas and prospects. The order, St. Petersburg University, dated the 25th of June, 2020, number 5885-1, me, Pietrovsky Mikhail Borisovich, Doctor of History, Academician of the Russian Academy of Sciences, Dean of the Faculty of Asian and Oriental Studies of St. Petersburg University, Director General of the State Hermitage Museum, was appointed Chairman of this Dissertation Council. Other members of the Dissertation Council were appointed by the same order. Let me introduce them to you. Nikolai Nikolaevich Yakov, Doctor of History, Honorary Professor, Head of the Department of History of Middle East Countries of St. Petersburg University. Present here. In the remote access mode we have Rezvan Yefimovich, Doctor of History, Professor, Head of Research, Museum of Anthropology and Ethnography named after Peter the Great at the Russian Academy of Sciences, Yefim Anatolovich. Can you see and hear us? Yefim Anatolovich, please say yes. Can you see? Can you hear us? We have no answer from Yefim Anatolovich. Please say yes or no. Yes, I can hear you. Okay. Leonid Rudolfovich Sukyanin, Doctor of Law, Professor, Researcher at the Department of Legal Theory and Interdisciplinary Law Disciplines, Faculty of Law, National Research University, High School of Economics. Leonid Rudolfovich, can you see and hear us? Yes, Mikhail Borisovich, I can see and hear you very well. Thank you. Matthias Rohr, Doctor Professor, Friedrich Alexander University in Erlangen and Nuremberg, Germany. Can you see and hear us? Could you please say yes? Matthias, Dr. Rohr? Dr. Rohr, could...
Yes, I can hear you. Yeah, and I see you.
Let me also introduce the degree applicant, Muhetdinov Damir Vaisovich. Let me also introduce the academic consultant, Vitaly Vyacheslav Naumkin, academician of the Russian Academy of Sciences, Professor, Doctor of History, Institute of Oriental Studies, also present in the remote access mode. Vitaly Vyacheslavich, can you see and hear us? Yes. To improve the quality of communication, dear colleagues working in the remote access mode, please keep your microphones switched off, but please remember to turn them on when you're given the floor. Let me also inform you that our session is being recorded and broadcast online at St. Petersburg University website. The speeches are being simultaneously translated from Russian into English or from English into Russian. In accordance with the order for awarding at St. Petersburg University academic degree of Candidate of Sciences and Doctor of Sciences, followed by the local regulations of St. Petersburg University, hereinafter referred to as the order, a session of the Dissertation Council shall be considered competent if at least 2/3 of the approved composition of the Council are present, but not less than 4 persons. Our Council consists of 5 persons. All 5 are present, including 3 Council members working in the remote access mode. Audiovisual contact is being established with all the Council members. Thus, we have the quorum. Dear Council member, let me suggest the following procedure for the Dissertation Council session. First, summary report of the Chairman on documents submitted by the degree applicant and their compliance with the applicable regulations, answers to possible questions, approximately 5 minutes. Degree applicant summary report outlining the key points of his study, approximately 20 minutes. Questions to the applicant strictly on his report, approximately 2 minutes per each question. Answers of the applicant, approximately 2 minutes per each question. Speeches of all members of the Dissertation Council in turn, with their evaluation of the thesis and the applicant's speech, with a summary of their positions, questions and suggestions to the degree applicant. The time shall be determined by the council members. Answers of the degree applicant to questions and remarks made by the Dissertation Council members. External reviews published at St. Petersburg University website. Answers of the degree applicant to possible questions. Chairman's review. Answers of the degree applicant. Open discussion. Speeches of the guests with summary of their positions and or specific questions and suggestions to degree applicants strictly on the theme of this study. No more than 2 minutes for each speaker. At that, all the speakers are kindly requested to register themselves in the registration sheet and to fully introduce themselves before speaking. Answers of the applicant, no more than 2 minutes per each question. Speech of the academic consultant of the applicant, no more than 3 minutes. Discussion of the council members before the open voting of the results. For this period, sound shall be switched off, approximately 5 minutes. I call a technical break because connection with one of the council members has been lost.
Леонид Рудольфович, вы нас слышите, видите?
Да.
Да, хорошо. Угу.
Leonid Rudolfovich, can you see and hear us? Your camera is switched off, so we had to call a technical break. So now we can continue. Answers of the applicant, no more than 2 minutes for each question. Speech of the academic consultant, no more than 3 minutes. Discussion of the Dissertation Council members before the open voting of the defense results. For this period, sound shall be switched off, approximately 5 minutes if we need this. Open individual voting. The chairman shall count the votes and the results shall be recorded in the minutes of the meeting. Making decision on awarding or not awarding the academic degree. Closing remark of the applicant, no more than 2 minutes. Dear colleagues, do you have questions or objections to this procedure? If no, the procedure is accepted, and let me start running the session. My summary report. This is by Damir for the degree of Doctor of Theology, Specialty 260001 Theology, on the theme the Islamic renovationist movement from the end of the 20th to the start of the 21st century, Ideas and Prospects, was accepted for defense by the order of the Academic Secretary of St. Petersburg University on the 20th of June 2020. Order number 5809/1. According to the information I received from the curator of today's defense, the degree applicant submitted to the Academic Secretary of St. Petersburg University a full set of documents for acceptance of his thesis for consideration and defense. All the documents comply with Article 12 of Section 3 of the order. Now, Damir Vaisovich, I'd like to give the floor to you. Dear Chairman, dear Council members, and dear guests, let me first of all cordially welcome you. Starting my speech, first of all, I would like to thank the rector of St. Petersburg University, Nikolai Mikhailovich Kropochev. Nikolai, the person who initiated my defense within the walls of St. Petersburg University. I am very grateful to Mufti Shi Ravil Gainuddin, who gave me all-round support and supported me, guided me with his valuable remarks and advice. Many thanks to Vitaly Vyacheslav Naumkin and Professor Taufik Ibrahim for their valuable comments, who helped me to better think over my work and improve it in conceptual terms. Also, I am very grateful to all my colleagues at St. Petersburg University who supported me with organization to defend my thesis. I am sincerely grateful for the opportunity to present the key thesis of my key points of my thesis, Islamic renovationist movement from the end of the 20th to the beginning of the 21st century, Ideas and Prospects. Everything that is happening has a great symbolic meaning for me. Once upon a time, in the walls of the Faculty of Oriental Studies of St. Petersburg University, Hussein Fushamov worked, who in the 19th century was one of the founders of the renovationist movement and rethinking of the subject among the Russian Muslims through study of Vaisovich work. I was able to learn the ideas of Russian theologians Marjani, Kursavi, Musa Begiev, who combined to the national renovation line. Studying the words of the ideas of Vaisovich and of the national theologians, for me was important person with perfect, brilliant education as a theologist, as is observed by the leading scientist Fakih, as a scientist, a learned man, also worked within the walls of Imperial University of St. Petersburg University, who became an expert on Oriental studies. And this combination of religious, spiritual education and a secular education and work at an educational institution encouraged me to study during the 25 years Islamic renovationist movement. And while studying it here in Russia, I certainly reached the source, the renovationists, the modernists who in the 19th century set this trend and made their contribution, Al-Afghani, Muhammad Abdo, and other scientists, but each time uncovering new layers of Russian modernists, of foreign modernists, I could understand it is necessary to go deeper and seek further. I was also encouraged to do that by my studies in the noble Mecca, center of Islam, the motherland of Islam. But already in 1990s, I saw some transformation of religious thought. I saw the epoch when theologists of the highest rank, the spiritual establishment, said simple words: no photos, no mention of Facebook, Instagram accounts, because even reading newspapers or watching TV programs was prohibited. And after several decades, you may see how these people, theologists, have changed their opinion, and how a huge country, the Muslim world, is getting immersed into this and starts wondering, how can we combine, on the one hand, religious principles, religious traditions, and on the other hand, understanding that the world is changing, the modern world, setting new questions, new challenges to which it is necessary to answer, and the generation living in it has to answer these questions and face these challenges. And studying modernist scientists, I realized they set themselves very relevant questions, such as gender, feminism, questions of rights, human rights, circularity concept, a civil society concept. These tasks, these questions already in the 19th century were asked by international theologists. But during these decades, the world has changed dramatically, and many answers today are insufficient. And if applied to Russia, Muslims in Russia, the active members of the Muslim community who consider themselves intellectuals, theologists, they are just starting to think of neo-modernism process, which in the West and in developed countries are daily, it has already become daily, they have already become daily trends. Many articles have been published, and something part of the daily life. But in Russia, so recently, I saw how Russian bloggers, Russian intellectuals asked, what can we read on Islamic feminism? And so feminism, spelled with an E, is the very wording, the understanding is still immature, but even the spelling of the word, which denotes the word, the intellectuals, as the people consider themselves intellectuals, is still new, and there are no answers. So the number of such questions is great. What I would like to say, it's very important for me that the idea of tajdid is deeply rooted in the spiritual tradition of Islam itself, and is not fundamentally aligned to it. We heard a lot that renewal tradition, renovationist tradition, is dictated by the West, by the forces from the outside who wanted to destroy the Islam identity, the Islamic culture, to make Muslims forget their traditions and fall to temptation of the Western civilization, Western culture. I'd like to say that most people who make such conclusions have not even read works of Muslim modernists and neo-modernism. They are not familiar with their opinions, and these words show lack of understanding of Islam through the Islam that is not inseparable part of it. Renovation is, the idea of renovation is deeply rooted in the Islam tradition. Hadith of Prophet Muhammad: in the beginning of each century will send someone who will renew for Muslims his religion. And the theme of renovation of religion has always been present in the Muslim tradition. That is why every century Muslims always tried to identify theology as scientists. Abu Hanifa, Al-Hazari, Ibn Taymiyyah, the 17th century. So these names constantly appear. And Muhammad Iqbal considers that Tajdid, renovation, is an authentic, inherent dialectics. If we talk about religious renovation, I'm not talking here about falling of the Muslim tradition in face of modern challenges, of which I am sometimes accused by some critics. On the opposite, I am guided by the sincere belief in its universality and the ability to perceive new issues and perform ethical and spiritual understanding of modernity. It's also very important for me to see the connection of Russian leaders of the renovationist movement with leaders of this movement in the rest of the world. Late authors such as Reza Ahmeddin, Muhammad Jalabagi, they were influenced by Afghani, Muhammad Abdo. But when we talk about such early thinkers as Kursavi or Marjani, we understand that their opinions, their beliefs, preceded the renovationist trend in the Islamic world. Of course, there is lots of room for analysis who initiated and how these trends started among the Russian theologians in the 18th century. But unfortunately, the Russian renovationist school stopped its existence when the last theologist, Mr. Jalabagiev, passed away, who devoted the last quarter of his life and lived abroad in Cairo and died there in 1949. For 70 years, the renovationist line has been interrupted. The tradition of Tajdid for the Russian Muslims. And today, taking up this theme, why I thought it's relevant, when you start Googling for some major neo-modernist, you come across works in Arabic or English. So in Russian, this theme has hardly been explored by Russian experts. There are separate works on philosophical beliefs and separate works on Muhammad Iqbal, but there is no comprehensive analysis of the phenomenon of neo-modernism, Islamic neo-modernism. Unfortunately, such works are absent today. That is why revival of the Russian theological school is a continuation of the work of its representatives, not a theoretical repetition of their concepts. The latter, at this historical stage, are derived from the social and cultural context in which they were created and try to change. The Islam neo-modernism is no new mazhab, nothing similar to the fifth mazhab. This is not a school with its teachers, students, endless commentary and legal casuistic. This is a change to broad, informal community of critical religious intellectuals. Neo-modernism, not acting against traditional. Neo-modernists study the tradition, make turn it into modern, develop the best in it. So part of is a source of own freedom and spiritual independence, and not as museum artifacts. Treating the tradition reasonably means to see not only the dialectics of continuation, form the life of the tradition. And as an example, I look at 4 prominent figures of the first wave of neo-modernism of the 20th century. In my opinion, all these 4 authors, 4 scientists, are excellent, each one in his own way. When I talk about them belonging to some kind of subculture, Pakistani or Syrian or Algerian scientists, I wanted to show not only geography but also the background with which these scientists have entered the world and defended their beliefs. I agree with Mikhail Borisovich with what he said in his review, that out of this list Mohammed Shakru stands out. On the one hand, these scientists have a background in theology, such as Fazlur Rahman, and others managed to study modern instruments in philosophy, but the scope of questions they studied brings them together. These are questions of divine revelation, the place of Sunnah as a tradition, and tasks that the modern Russian Muslim has to, and society have to understand. The Muslim neo-modernism does not require for the Muslim tradition no safe space. It knows that addressing it can be really productive, and it shows this in practice. I'd like to proceed to the procedures set for defense. First, Islam neo-modernism is the newest trend of development of the renovationist movement in Islam, which dates back to the 1st century of Hijrah. Neo-modernism combines the principles of the classical tradition, the ideas of the classics of modernism, and the achievements of modern world Islamic studies. The main representatives of the first wave are Fazlur Rahman, Muhammad Arkun, Nasser Hamid Abu Zaid, and Muhammad Shahrur. Second, the integrity of neo-modernism and as an intellectual phenomenon is ensured by the common program content that implies first a deep synthesis of the classical Islamic methodology, theological, legal, sociological, etc., and methodology of modern humanities, including Islamic studies. An excellent example of such synthesis we may see in the work of Fazlur Rahman. Second, the conceptual reconstruction of the Quranic picture of the world, which requires deep scientific study of the Quran. Development of humanistically oriented hermeneutics of the Quran. A use of contextual ijtihad and comprehension of the Quranic message as an ethical text. Comprehending the Sunnah as a phenomenon conceptually independent of hadith of modern authors, taking up this Adif Duderija, Fazlur Rahman, and Muhammad Shahrur. 6. Critically examining the history of Islamic thought and formulating a new view of the phenomenon of Islamic tradition. 7. Criticizing politicization of Islam in the context of returning to the original inclusiveness and universalism. 8. Understanding Islam as a universal platform for pluralism. 9. Openness to the future and the possibility to correctly change the view of religious life and its attitudes in the light of further development of mankind. Third point, the neo-modernist project proposes a comprehensive rethinking of the traditional Muslim picture of the world, which should be carried out through an arsenal of first, philosophical instruments, development of a new integral vision of Islam by Muslims themselves, and vision of the doctrinal picture of the world, and deconstruction of Islamic tradition, revealing the unthinkable and unreasonable in it. The theological tools, such as rethinking the status of revelation, further development of the method of ancestral ijtihad, and humanistic hermeneutics, reconstruction of the Quran's ethics, further development of the Sunnah tradition, and rethinking of the Hadiths. Ideological tools, definition of the humanitarian, social, and political theory of Islam, comprehensive criticism of the politically biased and totalitarian interpretation of Islam and Sharia-oriented paradigm as their basis. Understanding Islam as a platform for pluralism in the modern global world. Understanding the technological, scientific, and social shifts taking place at our time, as well as developing a strategy for life in the society of the future. 4. The neo-modernist project may represent a real basis for the full possible future renewal program in the Russian Muslim tradition. Such a program implies the creation of a modern theological school in the Russian context. The neo-modernist picture of the world in this case will have to be supplemented with materials of the national and world Islamic studies, and importantly include a number of ideas of the national theology that have regional specifics and therefore have a special value. 5. The desire of the neo-modernists to move towards a constructive correlation between the universal principles of Islam and a specific context is the starting point for the development of the modern Islamic theology in Russia, which implies a thorough study of the phenomenon of the Russian Islam, its history, and development of its specific features. Dear colleagues, I thank you for your attention, and I'll be glad to hear your questions and comments on my work. Dear colleagues, please feel free to ask questions, but strictly on this report in no more than 2 minutes. Does anyone have questions, please? There are no questions, then dear Damir Vaisovich, I enjoyed very much reading your thesis and your other publications and translations, and among my remarks made in my thesis, I'd like to mention the following. At the end of the 20th, beginning of the 21st century, the very popular in Europe and in the Muslim Ummah in Europe, the works connected with the work of Tariq of Ramadan, the author of the well-known, and I would like to hear your opinion about his concept of Euro-Islam and according to you, what are the prospects of this movement, the traces of which could also be seen in Russia. What is your opinion of these scientists? Thank you, Nikolai Nikolaevich. Tariq Ramadan, of now living neo-modernists, Muslim intellectuals, is one of the most well-read in the world and in Russia. And I'd like to say that Tariq Ramadan represents the second wave of neo-modernism, and in many his opinions and views repeats and rethinks, rephrases the works of his predecessors. If you read his works, not being familiar with Fazl Rahman works and other leaders of the first wave, you get the impression that Tariq Ramadan is very interesting and revolutionary. He provides new concepts and new ideas that are popular today, such as the term Euro-Islam. I think that the theme of neo-modernism, which was introduced first by Fazlur Rahman, the founder of this movement in the beginning of the 20th century. For me, it's closer to me and easier to understand the concepts described by Tariq Ramadan in his works. He's repeating opinions of his predecessors, and in that sense they are less interesting. But Tariq Ramadan, I included him as a contemporary Muslim thinker who, together with other modernists and neo-modernists, this book will be published soon, and the prospects of his concepts. I think that any concept in general, if it calls the people to think critically and to think about their position in the society, deserves respect. We know that Tariq Ramadan, not in all the countries of Western Europe and not in all the Muslim countries, is accepted, and his views are not shared everywhere. But I think he's a very interesting living author who, in other words, has explained what was written by his predecessors. Some views of Tariq Ramadan, for example, on female rights, on participation in elections, in political discussions, the composition of the civil society, they will find their followers and admirers. Thank you. Do we have other questions? If there are no questions, let us hear the reviews of the Dissertation Council members and of the with suggestions. And I beg your pardon, Mikhail Borisovich. Dr. Roy has a question. Dr. Roy has a question.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Do you hear me?
Вы меня слышите?
Okay, perfect.
Отлично.
My question goes to the very impressing list of proposals.
Мой вопрос касается очень интересного списка предложений.
So all the problems of Islamic theology, which has to be tackled anew. What is your idea about the institutional framework within which you are going to work further on these issues? Is it the university? Are there any other institutions in Russia where you try to develop this kind of renovationism within the Russian context? This is my question.
Dear Professor Roy, thank you for your question. Of course, first of all, I'm an acting rector of the Moscow Islam Institute and director for Center of Islam Studies of St. Petersburg University, and having access to wide audience of my students, whether I want it or not, being a part of this thinking, of this philosophy, we communicated to broad audience. Of course, my students, they are exploring the themes, the issues described by the neo-modernists of the first wave. Here we have Natasha Tabieva today in Russia. She's the only expert on Islamic feminism. So if you Google Islamic feminism, you get publications by our colleague who is a student at St. Petersburg University, and it is obvious that in principle we cannot become encyclopedia such as Fazlur Rahman, who covered were able to cover a wide range of problems, but distributing them among our students so that their research and their thesis cover specific topics. This is not a question of the future, but already we are trying to do at our public and Islamic educational institutions. So the practice, this has already been put into practice. Thank you. Professor Roy, I beg your pardon for not for missing your hand, raised hand.
No problem, thank you.
Since there are no further questions, let's hear the speeches of the members. Since all the reviews have been published at university website, I invite you to focus on the key points, questions and remarks. Do council members have any objections to that? I see everybody agrees. Then let us give the floor, let us hear the reviews. The applicant may answer each review individually or in the end each review individually. Okay, then I'd like to Nikolai Nikolaevich Dyakov. Thank you, Mikhail Borisovich. Dear members of the council, dear applicant Damir Vaisovich, let me once again say that I enjoyed reading your thesis, your doctoral thesis in theology. Damir Vaisovich, I had the opportunity to discuss some points of his thesis, and I think this thesis is a big step forward in development of the national theology, the national Muslim studies. The work is dedicated to a highly relevant, crucial period in the history of world and Islam in Russia, as we all know very well, as all the colleagues in Moscow and abroad know very well. The 20th century started the period that we can call the newest period in development of Islam in the world. And let me emphasize that this is the youngest and the most dynamically developing religion of the world, which quite long ago, almost 1,000 years ago, spread in Russian Federation, and many aspects connected with the history, ideology and trends are very important and crucial for us. The thesis submitted for procurement of degree of Doctor of Theology, thesis by the author is well known in Russia and abroad. It's a Muslim, a researcher, a theologist, the author of number of publications. First of all, in the modern times, beyond any doubt, is the work touches upon highly relevant in the theological and social and cultural theme of development and prospects evolution of Islam renovationist movement on the in the beginning of the 21st century. And I will not go into details regarding the structure of the work. I think it's very well written, well presented as a complete study which discloses important aspects of neo-modernist movement in Islam. And Damir Vaisovich familiarized us with the key points of his work, and I'd like to emphasize its high degree of relevance. According to the author, its relevance is explained by a number of important factors, such as insufficient exploration up to the present of the teachings and ideas of Islamic neo-modernists abroad and in Russia, suggested in recent years. first of all in the second half of the 20th century and in the beginning of the 21st century, Damir Vaisovich quite rightly emphasizes that this theme has not been well developed in Russia, though here I'd like to remind you of the works of those present here today, online and offline, Russian and Moscow colleagues. So some attempts have been made to approach this topic by our scientists, but it's absolutely right to say that Islam, neo-modernism, as the most recent stage of renovationist movement, which started in the first centuries of Hijr, as the youngest of the world religions, as the youngest, most dynamically developing religion, what in the Arab world is now called Untitled, coming from a single Abrahamic source. These trends were developed further in modern times, developed in world Islam and among the most prominent theologists and of our country. The object of the study, as is emphasized by the author, as a comprehend the theme, four concepts of the first wave, demonstrating the key features of this intellectual trend. Novelty, as was mentioned by the applicant in his speech, is explained by the task to contribute to renovation of Russian theological school. This is a very important point. On my behalf, I look at it as an important step, but not a final step in development, the study of neo-modernist tradition in Islam in the frame of national scientists as main centers here in St. Petersburg and in Moscow, and as I always emphasize, in the city of Kazan. The practical significance of the thesis, according to the author, lies in the fact that it introduces into scientific circulation, as emphasized by Damir Vaisovich, the works of a group of Islam neo-modernists of the first wave, and in the integral consideration of the contemporary stage of development of the renovationist movement, which started in the early ages of Hijra, deeply rooted of the system. The thesis by Damir Vaisovich starts with a chapter dedicated to the analysis of renovationist movement of prominent thinker, Muslim India or Pakistan, Muslim regions, now part of Pakistan, Fazlur Rahman Malik, whose works who worked in the 20th century, and the works of Fazlur Rahman Malik became the basis of the new school of Islamic thought in the framework of spiritual and ideological trend of neo-modernism. The second chapter, which I enjoyed reading most of all, is dedicated to the analysis of opinions of French Muslim Mohammed Arkoun on methodological pluralism, as said by Damir Vaisovich. For this thinker, the religious policy as in Muslim countries is especially outrageous because it uncovers a hopeless intellectual lack of responsibility of alliance of the state, which usurps the role of spiritual authority with official clerics. And the next section is dedicated to analysis of the theoretical system of a prominent Syrian thinker, Muhammad Shahrur. The author was born before World War II, who still enjoys great popularity around the world, in the Muslim world. Muhammad Shahrur, up to the present, is one of the most discussed representatives of Islam philosophy, as emphasized by Damir Vaisovich quite rightly, and being representative of an important trend of neo-Islamism. Muhammad Shahrur today still draws attention, critical opinions from his contemporaries in the Muslim world, but among the theologists around the world. The fourth section is dedicated to the works of prominent Egyptian scientist Nasra Hamid Abu Zaid, who died in 2010. And here I must say that as a representative of a prominent school of Muslim thinking of Al-Azhar University in Cairo, which has demonstrated its impact already. The final chapter contains analysis of the general renovationist program and develops the provision which the author set forth in his work, Islam in the 21st Century, the program of renovation. This work was published 4 years ago in 2016. Of course, the value of the thesis is in the analysis of traditional and modernist concept in the social and political processes which occur today, while in the medieval context the society with Sharia orientation could still exist and compete with other societies of its time. Yet today, according to Damir Vaisovich, in modern world, such approach is absolutely unacceptable. Speaking of the role of Russian Muslim community in the history of Islam, Damir Vaisovich mentions that the Russian Ummah tends towards anti-globalism, which is a very important observation and conclusion. A typical feature of the Russian Muslim community is defense of traditional values, multiculturalism and moderate conservatism. An important conclusion of the thesis is made in the final conclusion. In context of revival of the National Theological School, the desire of neo-modernists to address the problem of relation of universal principle Islam and specific civilization context. And generally speaking, and I consider this thesis to be an important step in development of the National Theological School, and especially of the study of Islam. I think the work deserves highest praise. The critical comments, remarks are of specific nature, and one of my comments, which I have already asked here during today's discussion, speaking of the possible increase of the range of studied issues which could happen in the next monograph, with which I think Damir Vaisovich will soon present to the public. I'm absolutely satisfied with the answer of Damir Vaisovich regarding the role of Tariq Ramadan and his supporters, the representatives of the Euro concept. Let me explain that some years ago, in 1990s, I met Tariq Ramadan, and as we met in Finland, at that time his concept was just emerging of Euro-Islam, was getting lots of attention from the Muslim community and from analytics, and official establishment from the governments in Europe, etc. And that is why the destiny of this concept, and we know that it's directly related to Hasdalbana as association of brothers, Muslim brothers, and the influence of which is prohibited in Russia, and the impact of his ideas on European Muslim Ummah. It will be very interesting to analyze. Hopefully the author will do that in his future publications and studies by Damir Vaisovich. And in my opinion, I have emphasized already that it was very interesting to read the works of Mohammed Arkoun, prominent thinker. It can be defined as a representative Algerian or French school of modern Islamic studies. And it seems to me that maybe, if not in his thesis, but maybe in future studies, the author should pay some attention to his Arkoun's predecessors, who certainly influenced his studies, such thinkers of North Africa, the former Abdul Hamid Ben Badis, prominent member of Association of Algerian Ulem Reformators. The most documents are in French, but the materials are important heritage for European Islam, for modernists and neo-modernists who today are actively speaking at leading European universities. I also think it will be interesting. I'm familiar with the heritage of, I think he can be described as a neo-modernist of North Africa, talking about the period before World War II. Khalid al-Hashimi, the founder of the first Algerian state, and the French conquest, beginning of the 19th century. Mir Khalid tried to bring together in his works traditional elements and conservative opinions and of modernism, considering the possibility to combine the trends with the Islam, with contemporary European values of the first half of the 20th century. And in my opinion, these remarks could be considered are quite insignificant. Of course, the work there are some technical issues. The work has some technical issues, and here maybe I am not really competent, but in my opinion, I think the names, the spelling of the names is sometimes incorrect. For example, in Pakistani, Muslim names are spelled differently from the rest of the world. But I think that for the future publications, it would be useful to use only part of the first part of the Muslim name, but give the initials, at least the initials of the full name, because sometimes the authors mentioned by you, Rahman Arkoun, they maybe such representation of the names in European literature or in other European languages is not good. These comments are not of principal nature and do not reduce the scientific and theoretical significance of the study conducted by Damir Vaisovich, and the work is being performed on a high professional level. The results is a comprehensive study of modern evolution and modern state and prospects of development of Muslim renovationist movement in the end of the beginning of the 21st century, novelty and scientific significance lie in the fact that the author managed to analyze prospects of Islam renovationist movement in modern world, in religious thinking of the Muslim community, of the Ummah in modern Russia. The work has been tested. The key points have been set forth in numerous articles, publications and monographs published by Damir, Vaisovich, Muhetdinov, and the results of the study, in my opinion, can be recommended to be for publication as a separate monograph, or maybe a set of monographs dedicated to Islam neo-modernism, which could be split in them maybe into periods before maybe World War II and after World War II, and a separate with a separate focus made on the authors of the latest wave of neo-modernism, which developed in the second half of the 20th century, beginning of the 21st century. And certainly these theses and publications, which will certainly be published based on it, are quite very useful, very instrumental for university audience, for all the students' study of theology, Islam studies, Oriental studies, culture studies, etc. And the level of validity, quality of theological analysis, the level of scientific novelty, key provisions set for defense, and by its practical value, the thesis by Damir, Vaisovich, Muhetdinov on the theme Islamic renovationist movement of the end of the 20th century, ideas and prospects, corresponds to the basic requirements set by the order on the 1st of September 2016, number 6821/1, on awarding academic degrees at St. Petersburg University. And Damir Vaisovich Muhetdinov deserves being awarded the degree of Doctor of Sciences, Specialty 260001, Theology. Article 11 of the above-mentioned order has not been violated. Thank you for your attention. Thank you very much, Nikolai Nikolaevich, Damir Vaisovich. I will keep my response brief. Nikolai Nikolaevich, thank you for your review. Let me repeat myself, all the neo-modernists you mentioned. I read their works, and serious al-Islah we are working for the first time will be introduced into scientific circulation, starting with Afghani, Abdo. So the first wave of second half, and if this will divide them into themes and periods, that's what publishing house, and so this will provide testing, and so thank you. Let us continue our discussion. Please focus on questions and remarks, because the text, we are all familiar with the text. Dr. Rezvan, please. Please switch the microphone. Can you hear me? Yes. Dear friends, it's very interesting. I enjoyed reading the work, and of late I came across few works which I read. I found so interesting, and I would like to say that this is a very bright, brave work, and it's also very relevant. And I'd like to say that among the theses that I read I seldom saw works which has such enormous practical value. My review is quite long, and it can be found at the university website. So it would probably take me like 40 minutes to read. So I will, if you allow me, I will limit myself to a very brief summary. I'd like to say that it's quite hard for me to evaluate what has the greatest significance among the two parts of this work. First part is the analysis of the works of neo-modernists of the first wave, and here indeed the author wonderfully draws our attention that their successors, the works of their successors, have been studied much more. This is his. This is an important contribution, or providing his own renovationist program, which has not only the practical but also scientific value. A second point to which I would like to draw your attention, I think we are talking about an important contribution in restoring the role of the Russian theological school. And here it's important to emphasize that in order to write such a work, the author had to read, to master a whole set of specific competencies, and he proves perfectly well that he has mastered all these skills, not only, and which is a unique case, not only in Russia, and there are few people like that in Russia capable of writing such a work. And speaking of, in my opinion, I became a very passionate supporter of the renovationist program suggested by the author, and it seems to me that this program has not only practical but the national is of national significance, considering the role of Islam in the complex political processes currently taking place in Russia. I indicated in my review some very minor drawbacks, which I don't want to mention here, because they by no means affect the assessment of the thesis. What I would like to say is that I became so enthusiastic with what I have read that we are working on St. Petersburg Museum of Islamic Culture. So I decided to dedicate to one of the rooms to the Islamic renovationist program, and I know that is challenging, but I think that will be an interesting thing to do. I think the work definitely has been seriously tested. It's sufficient to read the list of the author's works, and we all know what an active role in the life of Russian Ummah he plays, and his speeches fully correspond to the work we are discussing today, the thesis by Muhetdinov, Damir, Vaisovich, on the theme the Islam renovationist movement corresponds to the basic requirements set by the order 26 of the order rewarding academic degrees at St. Petersburg University. And the degree applicant Muhetdinov Damir Vaisovich deserves being awarded the degree of Doctor Theology, Specialty 260001, Article 11 of the above-mentioned order has not been violated. Thank you very much. Thank you, Damir Vaisovich. I am very grateful to you for your high, but Mohammed Shahrur died on the 21st of December 2019, and his work, so that technically it was impossible to make the necessary corrections. That is why with such a mistake, but we published in our journal an article dedicated to the death of respected article. So that's the only comment I would like to make. Yefim Anatolovich, indeed, more and reading this work more and more and learning about the beliefs of neo-modernists, you start to like them and the cause to which they dedicated their lives. And pandemic, as a living theologist, as a living practitioner, I can see that ideas set by questions asked by neo-modernism, they turned relevant where many traditions, Sharia-oriented, fiqh-oriented traditions were destroyed because all the mosques everywhere in the world were closed. Ummah has never seen anything like that in 1,400 years, and commenting and living in a different world where you cannot follow one of the main prescriptions of Islam. So neo-modernism with their concepts and approaches, they are as relevant as never before. Thank you. Thank you. Leonid Rodolfovich Sukianin, the floor is yours. Leonid Rodolfovich, thank you. Mikhail Borisovich, I will follow your request and I will not read the entire review. We'll focus on the key points only, maybe some specific features of the thesis by Damir Vaisovich which should be mentioned, and maybe some of the questions I got while reading this thesis. And I would like to say a couple of words about the relevance and importance of this work. The work it stands out among many other publications dedicated to Islam. I have always said that Islam, first of all, is a set of ideas. Institutions are important, movements and the numbers are important, and territories are important, but the most important thing is that Islam is a set of ideas. So this work is fully dedicated to ideas, which is a strong point of the work. It seems an obvious thing, but if you look at literature on Islam, you will find very few such works, not a lot of such works. This study of relevant development is very relevant, highly relevant today. It's typical for Islam. It's a great diversity of ideas that we are seeing. The practical side I'd like to mention also, without addressing some problems such as problems connected with conceptual issues of Islam. It's impossible to approach the most relevant problems of today, which to some degree are connected with Islam: terrorism, extremism, human rights, globalization, political future of the Islamic world, culture and religion. All these issues should be theoretically explored, not in serious occurs in Islamic world if it has not been thought through. This is also relevant for Russia, and the program, which very briefly mentioned by the Russian president, a meeting with the leaders of a Russian Muslim community, such as Specialization of Russian Islam. They are connected with how we understand the modern Islam. So this work, in this respect, stands out for its relevance. The novelty of the work lies in the fact that all the key publications, at least in Russia, were authored by the author himself. Who else wrote about this? Most of the articles were written by Damir Vaisovich, so we were really looking forward to this work. We heard his presentations, his reports at various conferences, we read his articles, so we were all expecting this thesis to appear, and so finally we can enjoy reading it. I will not dwell on the contents of the work, of the key points already mentioned here. The work has two parts of equal significant analysis of beliefs of the key representatives of Islamic neo-modernism, and the second part, in my opinion, maybe it's even more important. This is dedicated to the own program of renovationist, a new understanding of Islam on the basis of beliefs of these prominent representatives of Islam, neo-modernism. In that sense, the first part is a basis, and the author is very honest. He does not claim somebody else's ideas, but he sums the ideas up, he brings them together, but all the key concepts in his program, all the concepts are mentioned with reference to thinkers who pioneered, who proposed contextual and other things. It's a double shift and many other things which are very important for the very idea of Islam neo-modernism. The author develops and rests on the shoulders of those key figures of the Islam. The structure of the work is very logical. It brings together his own developments with some new provisions, new points. Is very skilled on a high level written work, is an independent work, it's absolutely independent. And in this, I'd like to say here, to praise Vitaly Vячеславovich, who was the academic consultant. This is a serious work. You may act as a consultant, but later be ashamed of your role, but this is certainly not the case. One should certainly be proud when his name is mentioned, and this work contains so many various issues and ideas and details that you immediately get numerous questions. So what I'm going to say now, these are not critical remarks, but questions one gets while reading this work, and the answers, if the author considers them serious and worth answering, will provide further evidence for conclusions. And I have quite a number of such comments. I have two general questions, which I still have. First of all, these questions do not apply to the key main conclusions, but I would like, in his work, the work repeats many times, the work on foundation of renovationist program. I'm a lawyer, so I always pay attention to words. To me, the program includes not only ideas but institutions, staff, set of action plan, stages of a program. I see in what is proposed by the author is the approach to rethinking Islam, its key ideas. Of course, this is the basis, but maybe it should be called not a program. A program is a question was already asked by our German colleague. Which institutions? And so I will ask a further question. So how will we proceed from the current state of Islam world to this program? I understand this was not the task of the thesis, and I don't expect the author to fully explain this, but maybe we should talk here not about program, but about a new methodology, which indeed is an enormous task in itself. That the program maybe will be developed when the program will get new details. A second question. One of the I paid attention to an interesting phrase. The author says, I'm quoting, right now our foundation is very unstable, foundation of insights. I think this phrase applies to the social and political aspects of the renovationist movement, but it can also be applied to this entire subject. Right now we are in this stage. Maybe it's too early to talk about a real program. And the second thing, the author is immersed in the neo-modernist paradigm in his work, and only in the very end of his work he mentions that modern ideas which are related with the key features of the renovationist program. Here are the names and others, but in my opinion this is not I agree with Damir Vaisovich that where the authors of these concepts started, they are different from the neo-modernist program, but they are like allies of the program, and in order to promote this program you need supporters. It's impossible to say that the program has mastered the Muslim world. It is not true. Right now it's popular mostly among the intellectuals, and for it to move forward, to get more supporters, it's necessary to pass through some preliminary stages. And so here I would not deny or mention in passing there are of course, they are not equal. They should not be compared with the neo-modernist program, but at the same time, in their own sense, they are going in this direction. They won't reach as far as neo-modernists, but at some stage, at some point, they are working moving in the same direction. For example, there's no finished political program or social and economic program, but we know in the beginning of the 20th century he said that there is no concept of Islamic world, there is no concept. So this should be disclosed in more detail, the concept of civil state, the concept which is developed with the Arabic Spring. So it would be good, maybe the author should have mentioned these concepts have not direct supporters, but supporters who approach this or moving in the same direction. Could play a positive role, and some very minor things mentioned by Damir Vaisovich in his introduction, and was maybe mentioned by Nikolai Nikolaevich in his speech. Damir Vaisovich many times mentioned that the idea of renovation is deeply rooted in the spiritual life of Muslims, but this idea is not simple, it should be demonstrated. Yes, the Islamic life, but what about in Islamic thought? But has it been easily implemented? Why the author gets so emotional to fight with the Sharia-oriented paradigm? If this idea is so deeply rooted, how is it deeply rooted? It is mentioned from now and then, from time to time, but mainstream in Islamic thinking, I think, was moving in a different direction. This was not the renovationist line. So here, I think it's this is a very strong statement on which the author should think a little more. I'm not arguing with the author. Maybe it's necessary to provide additional evidence. And finally, talking in the last part, talking about the Russian Theological School, page 397, Russian Muslim community as social realities characterized by democracy, rationality, moderation, high social status of the woman, and key role of the heart as an organ of cognition of God. Can we really agree that a Muslim community in Russia is characterized with all these features? I have some questions about this. Is it really so that we only see democracy and rationality? I'd like to, so it'll be interesting to hear the opinion of Yefim Anatolovich, where openness to other cultures and dialogue with other cultures, a multicultural existence, a multicultural space, a dialogue, tolerance today maybe is not a good word anymore, openness, and maybe joining circular agenda. Maybe the role of the woman is not an integral part of the Russian Muslim community. I met many representatives of the Russian Muslim community whose behavior and whose opinions are very different from this. So here, such evaluations are important, but so here I beg your pardon, maybe, but so these features should not be declared, not simply declared, but proven as well. And so maybe these things should not be mentioned, because it made me really wonder, because we know that in any Muslim community is characterized by great diversity. Could we reduce such diversity to a set of course not all are positive, that's just this democratic approach, social role of the woman, but only these things are mentioned. Is that, how justified is that? I am a little bit emphasizing or overemphasizing my question here for Damir Vaisovich, and here I don't want to argue his, but I'd like him to provide additional arguments. I will not mention how so I'll just make the general conclusion that the work has been performed on a high level. It's an independent scientific work which addresses a very challenging problem and is a contribution in the development not only of the theological thought but of scientific Islam studies, which is important for us since we are at St. Petersburg University, Faculty of Ancient Oriental Studies. I certainly believe that Damir Vaisovich deserves awarding the desired degree, and I'd like to inform my colleagues in advance that I will vote for awarding the degree. Thank you. Thank you, Damir Vaisovich. The floor is yours. Thank you. Leonid Rudolfovich, you have answered many of your questions yourself. We are dealing with terms here. By program, I not necessarily mean a plan of work. The Rigi of among the modern workers, they use the word program as meaning a line of thought. So when we talk about the masses, we all agree that today the Muslim wide population are not prepared to accept the entire set of neo-modernist ideas. So here we're talking about a program to bring this into something that people are thinking about, a program to introduce this line of thought to the people, make them familiar. Makashu de Sharia, Fikula Akaliyad. It's very necessary. They are allies, but seriously mentioning them in the work, that would make the list maybe 2 times longer, because each subject requires thorough coverage. If I include this in the so I wanted to focus on 4 neo-modernists only as a concept of Islamic neo-modernism. So I did not dwell on the points that you have just mentioned. And speaking of the term Okrenina, I think that Okrenina does not mean for productive implementation. It's rooted, doesn't mean. I insist that this tradition, Tajdid, is rooted. And any Muslim neo-modernist, take Musa Begiev, each time he talks about renovationist. What's wonderful about Islam is not Islam's fault that Islam world is falling behind the modern world. They cannot address pure universal provisions of Islam that are inherent to it. And as for regarding your last question, declaration about I made about the Islam in Russia, I wouldn't be here and I wouldn't be speaking today if I were not feeling. You mentioned the Caucasus, that not in all parts of Russia the rights of women, for example, in Islam, in the society, and gender issues are properly addressed. This is incorrect. For example, let's look at Dagestan. What do you think? What do we know about Dagestan? The Muslim tradition is conservative, and at the same time, we saw the rector of Theological Institute was a woman. Active role of Muslim women in contemporary Dagestan society. We see the same in North Caucasus, and what we often see as non-Islam, not a product of tradition or of culture or of mixture of odats, is not Islam. Is not proper Islam. So this region, which became part of the Russian Empire in the 19th century, experienced the renovationist period, and among some theologists, or renovationist trend, the general trend and focus is quite common to Muslims, is inherent in Muslim, not only in Central Russia, but in different time frames. The background, the environment will produce the desired results in long run. Thank you. Professor Matthias Royer, the floor is yours. Matthias? Could you please present your review, Dr. Royer? Let's turn the microphone on. Turn the microphone on. Turn the microphone on. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. So I start again. First of all, my apologies for not being able to talk to you in Russian, which is, of course, one of the most important scientific languages in this world. So thank you for organizing this translation of English. I think I can keep it short. My previous speakers have already mentioned a lot of aspects which have to be mentioned regarding this, I would say, landmark work, which Mr. Muhetdinov has submitted to the committee. So it was a real pleasure to read it. It is highly innovative. I think it brings together a very deeply rooted Islamic theology with all its richnesses in accepting different methods, different strands of argumentation in connection with a kind of universal scientific methodology. So I really appreciate it, and I think this is the very best Muslim tradition. If I am right, there is one hadith attributed to the Prophet of Islam, Muhammad, saying, "Seek wisdom even if you find it in China." So I think it is really a richness to bring together this core Islamic thinking with universal modern scientific methodology and strands of thinking. And I think it was very well chosen that he took these authors of Islamic renovationist thinking, since they are rooted in so different sciences, ranging from linguistics over philosophy, even engineering. So this is, I think, a very new approach, leaving this inner circle of traditional and very often traditionalist Muslim thinkers, lawyers especially, to have a broader look on the religion of Islam and on Islamic theology, since Islam is much more than legal normativity. It has its ethics, it has its social dimensions, etc. And I think the whole of Muslim society and intellectuals can very valuably contribute to further develop this kind of Islamic thinking and Islamic theology. And this is why I think it was so important to have a look at these thinkers who are building up now a much broader intellectual community within Islam. And I highly appreciate the author's approach of not fleeing into sweeping generalizations. So we can rethink everything and we can leave tradition aside. And you find a lot of works, especially published in Western countries, where people trying to develop a kind of liberal view on their religion, which I do appreciate, I must admit, but in a very superficial way. And the problem with this superficial approach is that it's not credible. Within a broad Muslim community, which insists, and I think rightly insists on, is this really Islamic thinking? Despite the universal scientific approach, but are we still arguing within the normativity of Islam? And I think this is exactly what the author so admirably contributes to, because he really knows what he is writing about. I mean, he uses a broad range of references in different languages. He is absolutely perfect in his command in Arabic language, etc. And so I think he enjoys a high degree of credibility, which is of utmost importance, I think, if you want to revitalize this rich Russian tradition of Jadidism, which was developed there in the 19th century, as the author has pointed out. I can imagine that within Russia and beyond, there might be resistance against these new approaches. We all know these Salafi movements, these Islamist movements, who stick literally to the wording of some scriptures, etc., etc. So I think to be convincing is to demonstrate that you know what you are writing and talking about, and that was the author proves in such an excellent way. So I think what is of additional importance beyond maybe the Russian situation, which was pointed out by the previous speakers, is the lack of information within the scientific community outside Russia. Unfortunately, most of us are not familiar with the Russian language, which prevents us to get access to this very rich European experience of Islam in a kind of non-Muslim majoritarian environment. We do have it on the Balkans, but we do have it in Russia also. And I think not only Muslims, but also European societies as a whole can learn a lot of these century-old experiences, which Muslims have taken and developed within this framework. So I'm deeply grateful to the author that he provides us now access to these sources. And this is why I can only encourage you to publish this work also in English language, because it would really enrich the scientific community, which unfortunately, as myself, is not familiar with the Russian language. I think it's really important. It's a really important work also in a broader framework of debates among Muslims, particularly outside the Arab Islamic world. So the so-called periphery, which is a periphery only in a geographic sense, if you take the Arab Peninsula as the center, I think that Muslim thinking in this so-called periphery is much richer, much more open as compared to the so-called center of Islamic thinking, be it in Saudi Arabia or in Egypt or in other countries. Why so? Because in these countries, and I've studied in Syria, I have close connections to these countries, and I'm often there, people cannot dare to very openly discuss questions of religion. And so you have to be very cautious. And this is narrowing down these richnesses of Islamic thinking, of Islamic theology, to a very narrow-minded strand, which unfortunately has started dominate large parts of Muslim societies in the world, namely the Wahhabi doctrines, or these neo-Salafi movements, which are so intolerant, not only against non-Muslims, but also within Islam, leading to such extremist movements like the Takfiris, who would call everyone an unbeliever who does not follow their very particular interpretation of Islam. And I think what the author here does is the complete contrary, to reveal the search of knowledge within Islam with all the shortcomings which are intrinsic to us human beings. We try to get knowledge, but do we really know the truth? And how do we cope scientifically and theologically with these human shortcomings, let's say? And so I think this is a very, very valuable contribution to demonstrate that this concept of ta'addud, of pluralism, is inherent to Islam from its very beginning. And not only to demonstrate that, but to very concretely demonstrate that, taking some very, very outstanding authors as a starting point, evaluating their different theories. It's not sweeping generalizations. It's pointing out their particular approach to getting knowledge, and then to summarize all their ideas. And this is, I think, a very new outcome of his scientific work, not only to look at one particular author, but trying to have a summary view of their common approaches, while not ignoring all the differences in detail. And then I, again, highly appreciate what he draws, the conclusion he draws from this evaluation of these authors. Formulating my learned colleague has criticized the term of program. I would say an agenda, setting up an agenda of intrinsic topics of Islamic theology and normativity, which should be discussed now within the Russian context and beyond. And I have already initially asked, how do you intend to institutionalize this kind of research, this kind of education, of information, etc.? I think this can, of course, be developed in the future on the basis of this work. But I think the main outcome is to having expanded on developing this kind of agenda, indeed touching all the core issues which have to be tackled if you want to really revitalize the Jadidi movements within Russia. To keep it short, many things have been indeed said. I have in my report suggested some very, very minor things regarding the English translation, regarding the terminology of names to be transliterated in a uniform way, but this does not touch to any extent, of course, the quality of this work, which I suppose was submitted in Russian language anyway. So in sum, I can only repeat myself. I'm convinced that the author has provided an excellent and groundbreaking study of modern Islamic renovationist thinking, as well as a landmark agenda for further reflection of Muslim self-understanding within the Russian context. And so without any reservation, with all conviction, I can suggest the faculty to award him the degree of the doctorate of theology he has applied for. And again, it was my utmost pleasure to read this excellent work.
Thank you very much. Спасибо большое.
Thank you, Dr. Roy. I only have to regret we cannot be here together and talk to each other in person. The remarks made by Professor Roy concerning transliteration in the English text, of course, I accept, and I shall make the necessary changes, the corrections. Also, I'd like to thank Professor Roy for his fundamental work on Islamic law, which entered scientific circulation recently, and Russian Muslims and scientists now have the opportunity to read this work. Here, Dr. Royal made an important contribution to development of the Muslim theology in the world. Thank you very much for this. Dear colleagues, we have one external review sent by Doctor of History, Professor, Department of Theology of Moscow Linguistic University, Roman Anatolyevich Silantev. You are all familiar with the review. I will briefly outline. The review is critical. The author believes that in the work doesn't set the scientific problem clearly. The provisions are of low significance. The work lacks novelty. The author has mixed up tasks and objectives, and the part dedicated to the renovation program is inconvincing, and the author asks why the author chose only 4 foreign neo-modernists and missed some prominent scientists of today. The author also thinks that such as Rafael Hakimov, Rustam Badrarov, and their provisions, Sharia-oriented paradigm does not correspond with the opinion of Grozny Fetva, the opinion of Muslims in Russia, and not the number of publications is incorrect. So the author thinks that this work does not correspond to the requirements for doctoral thesis. Damir Vaisovich, I hope you have read this review. If we forget the personal issues, I am very grateful to Roman Anatolyevich for his review, that he paid attention to my defense and to my publication. It's very hard to answer some questions. For example, the author thinks that there's no value, my work has no value, while leading researchers, world researchers, consider my work to have great significance for modern science and for Islam studies in particular. And the author says that students could translate and bring works in Islamic scientific circulation. I don't know why students have not translated works of Muhammad Abdo so far, who's one of the founders of the renovationist movement of the 20th of Afghani and other authors. These works have not been translated into Russian so far. Not to talk about comprehensive understanding of these works and an attempt to draw any conclusions from these works. The third question, world science, not to talk about Russian colleagues. They have written no works on neo-modernism. The works dedicated to specific authors are mentioned. I have mentioned in my thesis, and the most recent works in foreign languages, these to the Ridger, also mentioned in my work. My opponents have already paid attention to that works on neo-modernism are absent and non-existent in Russia. And as speaking of the fourth point, that I'm trying to create my own renovation program, setting a new mazhab or new legal trend. I have already said that I'm not talking about a fifth mazhab or a new trend. Is inappropriate. This is a lie. It's a trend of thinking, but this is a personal. The author may have his own, stick to his opinion. So these are all the questions asked by Roman Anatolovich in his review. Thank you. Thank you. As a chairman, I'm satisfied with the answers. And now is my turn to present my review, which is also fairly long. But the most important thing for me is that the thesis by Damir, Vaisovich, Muhetdinov corresponds with all the requirements applicable, and if we regarding its novelty, methodology, literature used, etc. And so I recommend to my colleagues to accept the thesis as corresponding to all the requirements. This is indeed a significant contribution to Islamic studies. It's an excellent work which provides excellent analysis, has never created before of neo-renovationist trend. The author has analyzed the key phenomena, the terms of Sharia-oriented paradigm and other, so it's quite well described. The author has identified the key principles of this renovation, attention to the ethical component of the Quran rather than the legal component. An excellent synthesis method is a synthesis of what is being discussed as a manner which enables the author to demonstrate what else the author can see in it. So this gives us practical application of his ideas. It seems to me and to my colleagues working involved in educational programs that the author's approach and the approach is a combination of theology and academic science, Islam studies. So that's a very important point that we should repeat, because not everyone agrees with that. The critical comments I coincide with those mentioned before. So the second wave of renovation should be, I would like it to be described in more detail, and the modern day assessment, the contemporary assessment of this second wave would be good to see this. It will also would be good to see the difference between these very different characters. Tariq Ramadan, these are very different characters, very different personalities, and the author has already answered. And on the other hand, it's important to explore the details. They are very prominent in many life circumstances. So it's good that you don't mention, but I think some ideas, some points of their biographies are critical for understanding. So he was Muzaid, where he was taken to court, the use of Hizbah. If formally you don't have the right to judge, is important for our today's life as well. So is who can judge? And the small point already mentioned is the spelling of names and the use of European, Syrian thinker, Egyptian thinker is very important. So how do we talk about people who belong to two cultures, a Syrian, a Pakistani thinker? Is not a Chicago thinker. So this we need to decide how we talk and how these two parts combine. So this is an excellent thesis, which I enjoyed reading and which made me think, and the work will have great significance for our future life in all the spheres. About this I have no doubt, and I think we will all remember that we took part in the defense of Damir Muhetdinov, where some key statements were made. Welcome, Damir Vaisovich. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To most of your questions and remarks I have already answering our colleagues. Maybe one thing about modern contemporary Russian authors. If we approach this critically, we know all our colleagues working on, but those who are really productive, those who have authored many articles included in scientific databases, and maybe that's the theme of the future, to understand the contribution of contemporary Russian theologists. We should define theologists with Muslim background who often know the subject from within and make competent, and they are really passionate about what they are writing about. And I think this is the theme for the future, for the young researchers, and maybe for those who are currently studying at St. Petersburg University. Well, dear colleagues, dear council members, do you have any unanswered questions or questions you would like to ask now? I think no. Does any of the guests, is anyone willing to speak? Anyone who is not a member of the Dissertation Council? You'll have 2 minutes. Is anyone willing to speak? No. Then, dear colleagues, we are done with the questions. Now I would like to give the floor to the academic consultant, Naumkin. Welcome. Can you hear me? Yes, we can. Excellent. Dear Mikhail Borisovich, dear members of the council, in my review, in Roman Anatolievich's review, we say, Roman Anatolievich said that this is the first attempt to defend a thesis on theology in Russia, and I would like to say that this attempt was doomed to success. I would like to put my name on this work. This is an excellent work, very high quality. I don't want to talk too much about this because I think this is obvious to the council members. What I would like to say, to emphasize, Damir Vaisovich is, first of all, is very passionate about Tajdid, his charisma, someone who combines 3 roles as a practitioner of Muslim and as a theologist, as a religious thinker, and is a scientist. And in his work, he acts as a circular scientist. So his life is divided into several spheres. There's several lines. One of such lines is an associate professor of University in Nizhny Novgorod, professor at St. Petersburg Islamic University. So he became passionate about Tajdid, and he's promoting these ideas excellently. So I think he has a great future, lots of potential, and the fact that this is the first thesis on theology defended at a secular university, I think this is very symbolic that hopefully it will be a success. And so it's very important, it's very good that Damir Vaisovich will be the first man to be awarded this degree at St. Petersburg University. Though he limited himself to those four thinkers, he wrote about many other things. Hassan Hanafi, who I knew very well, this movement was called Islamic Marxism. And then he has changed, but he remained in the line of Tajdid. And the fact that Damir Vaisovich has set his own trend, is setting his own trend, is excellent, because we can see what is necessary for every thesis. There's the knowledge needs application. Is put them into Islamic practice. So renovation, he's a renovationist himself, and that's all you need to know. Look at what's happening. See how renovation, how fast is taking place in different spheres. So out of these four thinkers, I knew Muhammad Aknoun. I knew personally. He made an enormous impression, his ideas, and I understood many things talking to him at conferences where we met. A long time ago it was. So these are people who changed the Islamic world. These are people who have changed the thinking, the minds of the people, made people turn in different direction. And so this is what is happening now. What Damir Vaisovich, impact of Damir Vaisovich's ideas. So recently we discussed with Islamic Community Council. They have gone as far as one of their latest events, recent events. They decided to organize it, to hold it in the synagogue in Paris as cooperation, such dialogue of religions. So this is all about renovation, which is so widely discussed today. So there is some inner renovation or revolution, maybe promoted by politicians, which is really changing something about Islam, which we should not miss. And with the help of such theses, such works, we Oriental studies, we won't miss it. I don't want to talk too much. What I wanted to say is repeat what was said by other members, by my colleagues, is that this is an achievement, significant achievement, very interesting. Me too, have some disagreements, minor disagreements with the author, but he was the author, not the academic consultant. So this is his work. He has the right for his own opinion. It seems that considering this perfect agreement, except for one external reviewer, which I take as a manifestation maybe of good humor, because saying that the author's written, we are not, none of us is familiar with this work. Maybe he's a genius, but I've never met anyone like that. So I think such comments such remarks could be ignored. They do not deserve real attention. For Damir Vaisovich, we should advise him not to miss any critical remarks, any criticism. He has a hard road in front of him. And I remember with colleagues, we went to a conference with our Chechen friends. They attended. So maybe you remember in Budapest hotel. So this will happen again, this pluralism in Islam in Russia. And I think maybe this is probably a good thing, this democracy, this democratic spirit. The more we talk about that, the better. Once again, I would like to wish you lots of success. And I think the thesis corresponds to all the requirements applicable. And I believe that Damir Vaisovich deserves being awarded the desired degree of Doctor of Theology. Thank you. Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, since our session, some of the participants are working in the remote access mode, do council members and others present, or maybe the degree applicant, have any unanswered questions regarding our work mode? If yes, please let us know. Everything is clear. Dear colleagues, dear council members, we have now the opportunity to take a technical break to discuss the results, and the sound shall be switched off. Do we think such a break is necessary? Please say yes or no. Do we need a break to discuss the results? Dear council members, Nikolai Nikolaevich, do we need a break? Leonid Rudolfovich, do we need a break? I think there is no need. Everything is obvious, everything is clear, so we don't need any additional time for discussion. Yefim Anatolyevich, I agree. Dr. Royer, do we need a technical break? A special discussion?
I do agree. I think everything has been discussed.
Я считаю,
Поэтому давайте мы без...
Okay, then let us continue without a break. Everything's working well. We can all hear and see each other. I put a question of awarding to Muhetdinov Damir Vaisovich the degree of Doctor of Theology, Specialty 26001 Theology, to the open individual vote. Let me remind you that a decision of the Dissertation Council on awarding a degree shall be considered positive if at least a half, but not less than 3 members of the Council present voted for it according to Article 23 of the Order. The ceremony. Council member Dyakov Nikolai Nikolaevich, your opinion? Please. I believe Damir Vaisovich deserves awarding the degree of Doctor of Theology, Specialty 26001 Theology. Thank you. 4. Council member Rezvan Yefim Anatolyevich. Your opinion, Yefim Anatolyevich, are you for or against awarding the degree? There's no connection. Yefim Anatolyevich, you have to say for or against. We have to hear Yefim Anatolyevich speak. Council member Sukianin Leonid Rudolfovich, I am for awarding the degree to Muhetdinov Damir Vaisovich. Council member Professor Matthias Roy, your opinion, please.
I'm very strongly for awarding him the degree.
За. Спасибо.
And we need... Okay, now I can hear you. Yes, of course, I am for awarding the degree. Thank you. And me, Petrovsky Mikhail Borisovich, vote for awarding the degree to Damir Vaisovich. Thus, let me count the votes. all 5 council members voted for awarding the degree. Out of 5 members, no one voted against, no one abstained. All 5 members voted for. Thus, dear colleagues and friends, let me announce that out of 5 members present at the Dissertation Council session, 5 voted for, no one voted against, no one abstained. The decision on awarding to Muhetdinov Damir Vaisovich degree of Doctoral Theology, Specialty 260001 Theology, has been made. Damir Vaisovich, I congratulate you, but before that, dear colleagues, since our session has some participants working in the remote access mode, do you have any questions that need further discussion? Do council members have any unanswered questions? No. Then the defense of the first thesis in Islam theology. I congratulate all of us on this occasion, this historic occasion. And the floor is yours, Damir Vaisovich. First of all, on this special day, I would like to thank the Lord Allah for granting me the knowledge, the patience, the wisdom, and the ability to be grateful to my teachers, because that is why I started my speech today with the mention of Vaisovich, because what you learn in your youth remains with you during your life. And for that, I am very grateful to the members of the Dissertation Council, because despite I have not studied from you personally, I consider all of you my teachers, with a capital letter, because in 1990s, when young activists, Muslims, had no literature at all, except for translations of Quran into Russian by academician Krachkovsky, separate works which we ran, translation by Imam Ghazali, Quranic by Dr. Petrovsky, Leonid Rudolfovich's Sharia, and Efim Anatolievich's The World of Quran. So these first books became my essential reading as a theologist and as a man is looking for knowledge. They set the foundations of critical thinking, which is always present in the modernist works, be it sayings of Prophet Muhammad or teachings of a leading philosopher, teacher, should always be critical. So your texts inspired me to look at what we call Islamic heritage, and which is truth for me. So I look at that as a product of human genius, first of all. And a product of human genius, you look through a particular epoch, a particular stage, and you can always take all the good things, all the positive things, and move forward using the works of your predecessors and teachers. My cordial thanks, sincere thanks to my teachers, to my spiritual teachers who taught me this love for knowledge, for books, which is Al-Kitab, were the people of the book. So this Vaiskan path, life, a life of theologist who dedicated his entire life to science and religion, will help me to educate Muslim theologians, thinkers, and activists who will combine these two elements as the two wings of a bird. And that will help us to revive the School of Theology, of which our president spoke, and to which he encouraged the Muslim community to do. Muslim activists working in close cooperation with scientists, with academics, will help to take Russian theology and religious studies to new heights, and will help us become the leaders, the new trend setters. I'm very grateful to the rector of St. Petersburg University, and first of all to Mufti and to all the religious figures who prayed together. May Allah be with all of us. Thank you. Thank you. We shall finish our meeting. I thank everyone for your participation. Thank you. Today was so we have not met each other. We have not seen each other for a long time. So that was a very special day for all of us. Please stop online broadcasting, and we congratulate you once more. Thank you.